It started with a sound. A faint, dragging noise above the ceiling, like something being pulled across the floor. At first, Emma thought it was the wind. The old house creaked often, especially during the early spring storms, but this sound was different. It had rhythm, weight, intent. She froze, her hands still wet with dish soap, staring up at the ceiling of her tiny kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked toward 2:47 a.m. Outside, the street was silent, no cars, no people, just the hum of a distant power line. Her heart began to beat faster. She told herself it was nothing, maybe a raccoon or the pipes again, but deep inside something whispered someone's up there. She lived alone, or at least she thought she did. Emma had moved into that small one-bedroom house 3 months ago, grateful for something cheap and quiet after the breakup with her fiancé. The rent was almost too good to be true, $700 a month for a standalone cottage on the edge of town. Her landlord, Mr. Harlan, seemed kind. A quiet man in his late 50s with a soft voice and gentle smile. He lived next door in the larger main house, and had promised that if she ever needed anything, she could just knock. But now, she wondered, had he ever mentioned what was above her? Emma grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The sound had stopped. She stepped slowly through the hallway, the floorboards creaking under her feet. The air smelled faintly of dust and pine. When she reached the end of the hall, she looked up, and there it was, a small wooden hatch in the ceiling, the attic. She had never noticed it before. Her pulse quickened. She stared at it for a long time, trying to summon logic. Maybe there was a loose beam or a branch scraping the roof. That had to be it. But her mind kept circling back to the noise, the unmistakable drag, like footsteps mixed with something being moved. Emma backed away and went to bed, leaving the hallway light on. It took her hours to fall asleep, every tiny sound amplified in the silence. The next morning, she told herself she'd imagined it. She made coffee, put on music, and tried to focus on work. She was a freelance illustrator, so her days were spent sketching alone at the kitchen table. But all day, that image stayed in her mind, the small square of wood above her head. By evening, she decided to mention it to Mr. Harlan. He answered the door almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting behind it. His smile was polite, but his eyes darted nervously. "Everything all right, Emma?" "Yeah," she said, forcing a laugh. "It's probably nothing, but I heard some noises in the ceiling last night, like, footsteps maybe. Do we have rats or raccoons?" Mr. Harlan's expression shifted just slightly. "Oh, probably just the house settling," he said quickly. "These old beams make strange sounds when the temperature drops, don't you worry about it." "Okay, I just thought I'd let you know." "Appreciate that," he said, smiling again. "You're settling in fine otherwise." She nodded, but something about his tone, the speed of his answer, the way his eyes avoided hers, unsettled her. That night she locked her bedroom door for the first time. At around midnight she woke up to a soft creak, not above her this time but from the hallway. She held her breath, listening. The floor outside her room whispered with faint movement, then silence, then a quiet thud from above. She sat up, her body trembling. Slowly she turned on her bedside lamp. The light flickered once before steadying. She waited, heart pounding. The sounds continued for nearly an hour, faint and deliberate, like someone shifting boxes or crawling. The next morning she was pale and exhausted. When she stepped outside to get some air, she noticed something odd. The attic hatch had a tiny line of dust disturbed around its edge, as though it had been opened recently. Her hands went cold. She spent the day searching for explanations. She even called a pest control company, but they couldn't come until Friday. That night, she decided to stay awake. At 1 a.m., the noises began again, slow at first, then more pronounced, the scraping of something heavy. She turned off all her lights and held her phone tightly. The flashlight beam trembled in her hand as she pointed it at the ceiling. She thought about calling Mr. Harlan, but something inside her said no, not yet. She dragged a chair into the hallway and climbed up, her fingers brushing the edge of the attic hatch. Her breath came fast, her legs shaking. She pressed her ear against the wood and froze. There was breathing. Soft, steady human breathing. She jumped down, heart racing. For the rest of the night, she sat in her car outside the house, watching the dark windows. Nothing moved, but she knew someone was up there. The next morning, she went to Mr. Harlan, again. "Hey, she began carefully, "I think there's someone in the attic." He blinked. "Someone?" I heard breathing. It's not animals, I swear. I think maybe someone broke in. Mr. Harlan's face went pale, then forced a smile. Emma, you've had a stressful few weeks, he said softly. These old houses play tricks. Why don't I come by tonight and check it myself, all right? She hesitated. You'll check it. Of course, he said. I'll be there around 8. When he arrived that evening, he brought a small flashlight and a metal step ladder. Emma followed him nervously as he positioned it under the attic hatch. Probably nothing, he said cheerfully, climbing up. He unlatched the hatch and peered inside. For a moment his face disappeared into the darkness. Emma held her breath. Well, he said finally, coming back down. No sign of anyone, just some old insulation and dust. You're safe, Emma. She nodded, embarrassed but not convinced. Thanks for checking. Anytime, he said, smiling again. You rest easy now. But later that night, lying in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes when he came down the ladder, that flicker of something between relief and fear. 2 nights later, she woke again to the sound of footsteps. This time they were heavier, closer to the center of the house. Then came a faint metallic clink like something being dropped. She sat up, her pulse roared in her ears. She turned on her flashlight and scanned the room. Silence. Then a whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice, low and hushed, directly above her. Her breath hitched. She grabbed her phone and opened the camera, turning on video mode. Slowly, she aimed it upward. The faint hum of her own fear filled the room. She started recording, the lens focused on the attic hatch. For nearly 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then, a shadow moved across the thin crack of light near the hatch's edge. Emma gasped and stopped the recording. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, she packed a small bag and went to stay with her friend Melissa across town. She told Melissa everything, the noises, the breathing, the recording. Melissa frowned. You should call the cops. I can't, Emma said, voice shaking. What if I'm wrong? What if it's just... No, Emma, that's not normal. Someone could be living up there. By the next day, she had convinced herself to go back just to grab her laptop and a few sketches she needed for work. The sun was high when she pulled into the driveway. Everything looked normal. When she stepped inside, the air felt stale, heavier somehow. She moved quietly, her eyes darting toward the ceiling. The attic hatch looked undisturbed. She went into her bedroom, grabbed her laptop, and was about to leave when something caught her eye, a corner of paper sticking out from under the doorframe of the hall closet. She bent down and pulled it free. It was an old envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was a photograph, a black-and-white image of a young woman standing in front of the same house. On the back, in faded ink, was written, Harlan's wife, 1994. Her chest tightened. She remembered him mentioning once that he'd lost his wife years ago in an accident. But the way he said it, flat, rehearsed, now echoed differently in her mind. She slipped the photo into her bag and left quickly, heart pounding. That night at Melissa, she replayed the attic recording. She turned up the volume, listening to every tiny sound. At 27 seconds just before the shadow appeared, there was a faint whisper, a man's voice murmuring something like, "Don't let her know." Emma dropped the phone, shaking. The next day she called the police. They came in the afternoon, 2 officers in crisp uniforms. Emma explained everything, the noises, the video, the whisper. They nodded politely but looked skeptical. "We'll take a look," one of them said. She followed them back to the house, her stomach twisting. The officers inspected every room, then brought in a ladder and opened the attic. From below, Emma watched as their flashlights swept across the darkness. For a long moment neither spoke, then one of them said quietly, "You'd better come see this." Her knees felt weak as she climbed the steps. The attic was larger than she'd imagined, filled with old boxes and insulation. But in the far corner, behind a stack of dusty furniture, was something she hadn't expected. A sleeping bag, a small lamp, and half-empty food containers, apples, granola bars, bottled water. Emma's mouth went dry. "Looks like someone's been staying here," the officer said grimly. They found a small notebook too, pages filled with dates, times, and short notes like "she's home" or "lights off at 11." Emma's legs nearly gave out. "Oh my God." The officer shone his light toward a small section of wall. where a square vent opened directly above her bedroom. From that hole, whoever had been up here could have watched her every night. The officers took photos and bagged the notebook for evidence. One of them promised to check with the landlord about who had access to the attic. Emma couldn't speak. She felt hollow, like the walls themselves had been watching her. That evening, she sat in her car for hours, staring at the house. She thought about the photograph, the notebook, and the whisper in her recording. Every piece pointed in one direction, toward the man next door. But she needed proof. Around midnight, she saw a light flicker in one of the attic vents, a dim, moving glow. Someone was up there again. She gripped the steering wheel, her body trembling. The police had been there that afternoon. Whoever it was must have come back after they left. Then she saw him. Through the narrow window of the main house, a silhouette passed by, tall, thin, unmistakable, Mr. Harlan. He was carrying something in his hands, something long. Emma ducked down, her breath sharp and shallow. Through the windshield, she watched as he crossed the yard in the dark, heading straight toward her house. He disappeared inside. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. She dialed 911 but hesitated. The operator's voice came through. 911, what's your emergency? Emma opened her mouth but no words came out. She was staring at her own dark house, knowing the man who owned it had just walked inside into the place where she had once slept and maybe still wasn't alone. She whispered finally, someone's in my house. And as the operator began to respond, the attic light flickered again, once, twice, then went dark completely. Emma stared through the windshield, tears in her eyes, realizing with horrifying clarity he hadn't just gone inside. He'd gone up. The operator's voice crackled through the phone, calm but urgent. Ma'am, are you in a safe location? Emma ducked lower in her car seat, her voice trembling. He's inside, my landlord. I think he's in the attic again. Stay on the line. Officers are being dispatched right now. Do not approach the house. Her breath came in short bursts. She could see faint movement through the curtains, the flicker of a flashlight. Every instinct screamed at her to drive away, to leave and never come back. But something kept her frozen, a paralyzing mix of fear and disbelief. The dispatcher kept talking, asking her to describe the man. His name's Harlan. He's my landlord, late 50s, gray hair, glasses. I saw him go in with something, maybe a crowbar. Okay, Emma, officers are 3 minutes away. Stay where you are. 3 minutes felt like an eternity. The glow inside the house vanished. The windows turned black again. Then a sound. A soft, deliberate creak. The attic vent above the front porch shifted slightly, as if someone was pressing against it from the inside. Emma clapped a hand over her mouth, holding back a scream. Her phone screen glowed against her face as she whispered, "He's there. Oh my God, he's there." Emma, listen to me, the dispatcher said firmly. Help is almost there. Keep your doors locked and lights off. A moment later, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street. 2 police cars rolled up, silent but fast. Officers stepped out, guns drawn, flashlights slicing through the dark. Emma pointed frantically toward her house. He's in the attic. The officers moved quickly, shouting commands as they surrounded the house. One went to the back door while another called through a loudspeaker. Mr. Harlan, this is the police. Come out now with your hands up. No response. Then a muffled thud from inside. They broke the door open. The sound of boots echoed through the hallway. Emma couldn't see what was happening, only the flicker of their lights flashing through the windows. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, one officer appeared at the door and motioned her forward. Ma'am, you can come in. Emma stepped cautiously out of her car, her knees trembling. Did you find him? The officer shook his head. Not yet, the attic's empty. Her heart sank. Empty, but he was just there. I saw the light. We found fresh footprints in the insulation, the officer said, and there's a small crawl space leading to the outer roof. He might have slipped out before we arrived. Emma felt dizzy. He's gone. For now, but we'll find him. They asked her to stay at a hotel for the night just until they secured the property. She agreed instantly. But as she packed a quick overnight bag under the police escort's watchful eye, she couldn't shake one thought. He knew the police were coming. How? The next morning, Detective Rowe came to her hotel room. He was tall, calm, with the kind of face that had seen too many strange things. He carried a file under one arm. "Miss Collins, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your landlord," he said. Emma nodded nervously. "How long have you known Mr. Harlan?" 3 months, she said, "since I rented the house." Rowe jotted something down. "Did he ever give you a key to the attic?" "No, I didn't even know it was accessible until a few days ago." "Did he mention his wife to you?" Emma hesitated. "Once, he said she died years ago in an accident." Rowe exchanged a quick glance with his partner. "Did he say how?" "No, he just changed the subject." The detective sighed, setting the folder on the table. "Emma, we did some digging. Mr. Harlan's wife Laura went missing in 1994. The case was never solved." Emma's blood ran cold. "Missing, not dead." "No body was ever found," Rowe said quietly. "Harlan told everyone she left him, but there were inconsistencies. Neighbors reported hearing fights, then she vanished." She swallowed hard. "You think he—" "We don't know yet," Rowe interrupted. "But last night inside your attic we found a few items that don't make sense." He opened the folder and slid 2 photos across the table. One showed a cracked porcelain hairbrush, old and dusty. The other, a woman's gold necklace, tarnished but still glinting faintly under the light. "We found these hidden behind the insulation," Rowe said. "They match the description of Laura Harlan's personal belongings." Emma stared at the photo, her stomach turning. "Why would he keep them there?" she whispered. Rowe leaned back. "That's what we're trying to figure out. But if he's been living in that attic, watching you, it's possible this house was more than just a rental to him." Emma's hands trembled. "You think he brought me there on purpose?" The detective didn't answer. Later that afternoon, they took her statement, advised her not to return to the property, and promised to increase patrols in the area. But Emma couldn't rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that attic vent and the shadow behind it. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of the hotel room, watching the city lights blur through her tears. The thought of Harlan still out there, free, made her skin crawl. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. At first silence, then a slow, rasping breath. "Emma." She froze. The voice was soft, almost tender, familiar. "You shouldn't have gone snooping." Her entire body went cold. "Harlan. You don't understand," he whispered. "She's still here, she's been here all along." Then the line went dead. Emma screamed and dropped the phone. Within minutes, she called the police again, but when they traced the number, it was from a prepaid burner, untraceable. The next day, detectives searched the property again. They found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. But Emma couldn't move on. She couldn't let go of the photo she found, the one of his wife standing in front of the same house. Something about the look in her eyes haunted her. A forced smile, maybe, a kind of fear. She began researching every old newspaper article, every archived photo she could find. What she discovered chilled her to the core. Laura Harlan hadn't just disappeared. Before she went missing, she had filed a police report for domestic abuse. It was withdrawn days later, and then she was gone. Emma scrolled through pages of information, sleepless and obsessed. Then she stumbled upon an old property listing from 1993, the same house she was renting, only back then it was listed under Laura's name. Her name was on the deed, not Harlan. The house wasn't his at all. Heart racing, she grabbed her phone and called Detective Rowe. "Detective, you need to see this," she said, voice shaking. "The house, it belonged to Laura, not him." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Stay where you are, Emma, we'll come get you." But as she ended the call, something caught her attention on the hotel room desk, a folded piece of paper she hadn't noticed before. Her heart stopped. She unfolded it slowly. It was a hand-drawn sketch of her, sitting at her kitchen table exactly the way she had been 2 weeks ago working on her laptop. The drawing was detailed, precise, and signed at the bottom, H. Emma dropped it in horror. She hadn't brought any of her sketches with her. Someone had been in her room. She turned toward the window, and that's when she saw it. Across the street, behind a parked van, a figure stood motionless, watching her. Even from that distance, she could see the outline of his face, the gray hair, the glasses. Harland. Emma stumbled backward, grabbed her phone again, and ran into the hallway. The hotel manager saw her panic and called security, but by the time they got outside, the van was gone. The next hours were a blur. Police searched the area again, nothing. That night, Emma couldn't take it anymore. She decided to face it, to go back to the house to find out what he'd been doing there. It was raining when she drove back, her wipers slicing across the windshield. The street was empty, the air heavy with mist. She parked across from the property and sat in silence, staring at the dark outline of her home. Every instinct told her to leave, but she couldn't, not without knowing. She slipped a small flashlight into her jacket pocket and stepped out. The wet grass brushed against her legs as she crept toward the back door, the one the police had forced open. It hung loosely now, the lock broken. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and something else, rot. She moved quietly, her beam of light cutting through the darkness. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. Every sound, the drip of rain, the groan of the floorboards, made her jump. When she reached the hallway, she looked up. The attic hatch was open. Her throat tightened. The ladder still leaned against the wall where the police had left it. She hesitated for a long moment, then gripped the sides and began to climb. Each step creaked beneath her weight. Her breath came in shallow bursts. At the top, she pushed herself through the hatch and into the darkness. The air was thick, stale. Her flashlight beam swept across the dusty floor, the sleeping bag, the food wrappers, the notebook, everything the same. But then in the corner, she saw something new. A second sleeping bag, smaller, torn, and next to it a small, faded photo frame. Emma crawled closer. Inside the frame was the same woman, Laura, smiling beside Harlan in front of the house. But there was something else tucked behind it, another photo. It was Emma. She dropped it, her hand trembling. A whisper came from the shadows. "You look so much like her." Emma froze, the voice was right behind her. She turned slowly. Harlan stood in the corner, his face pale in the flashlight beam, eyes wide and glassy. "She wanted to leave," he said softly, "but I couldn't let her go. She belonged here just like you." Emma stumbled backward, her hand reaching for her phone. "Stay away from me." He took a step forward, his expression eerily calm. "I kept the house for her. I fixed it up, made it just like it used to be. When I saw you, I thought maybe it was a sign." He smiled faintly. "You even sleep the same way she did." Emma screamed and turned toward the ladder, but his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. The flashlight fell, spinning across the floor. "Don't run," he hissed. "Not again." She kicked hard, breaking free, and scrambled down the ladder. He shouted after her, his footsteps thundering behind. She sprinted through the hallway, heart hammering, slipping on the wet floor as thunder boomed outside. She reached the front door, yanked it open, and nearly collided with flashing lights. Police cars. Detective Rowe stepped out, gun drawn. "Emma, get back." Harlan froze in the doorway behind her, his face twisted in confusion. "Drop it, Harlan," Rowe shouted. For a moment everything went still, then Harlan laughed softly, a strange, broken sound. "You don't understand," he said. "She's here, she's still here." He pointed upward toward the ceiling. "She never left." Rowe moved fast. 2 officers tackled Harlan to the ground as he screamed her name, "Laura, Laura," over and over until the sound faded into sobs. Emma stood trembling, rain soaking her hair, staring at the open attic hatch. Something inside her told her not to look, not to see, but curiosity won. Slowly, she climbed halfway up the ladder, shining her light into the shadows above. There, behind the insulation, half covered in dust and debris, was the outline of something human. A skeleton. Emma's scream tore through the night. She stumbled backward off the ladder, landing hard on the floor as the flashlight clattered beside her. The beam flickered once, then steadied, casting its pale light across her shaking hands and the open hatch above. Detective Rowe rushed forward, shouting for backup. 2 officers climbed into the attic, their boots scraping against the wooden beams. Moments later, one of them called out, voice tight with shock. "Sir, there's a body up here." Emma pressed her palms against her ears as if the words themselves could be blocked out. The air felt thick, suffocating. She could barely breathe as she watched them pull down the remains, fragile bones tangled in shreds of fabric that might once have been a dress. The necklace they'd found earlier dangled from the skeleton's neck. Laura Harlan had never left, she'd been up there the whole time. As the officers zipped the remains into a black body bag, Harlan screamed from the front yard where he was being handcuffed. "Don't take her away from me, she belongs here." His voice cracked, raw with grief and madness. "I kept her safe." Emma couldn't look, she just sank to the floor, staring blankly at the hatch, her mind reeling. The attic wasn't just where he'd lived, it was where he'd kept her. Roe crouched beside her, his voice low and steady. "You did the right thing, Emma, it's over now." But she shook her head slowly. "No, it's not." Because even as the police led Harlan away, something about his last words kept echoing in her mind. "She's still here." For days afterward, Emma stayed in a hotel under police protection. Her name appeared in the local news. Tenant uncovers missing woman's remains in attic. Reporters left voicemails. Tabloids twisted the story into something grotesque, calling her the girl who replaced the wife. She ignored them all. Detective Rowe visited her once more, this time without the stern detachment of a cop. He brought her coffee and sat across from her, quiet for a long while. "They've confirmed it's Laura," he said finally. "Dental records matched." Emma nodded, staring at her cup. "Turns out," he continued, "Harlan inherited the property after her disappearance. He told everyone she'd run off. No one questioned it, small town, no evidence, but the attic, he sealed it up. Claimed it was too damaged to use, that's where he put her." Emma's voice trembled. "And then he moved in with me, living underneath." Roe sighed. "We think he used that attic space to relive things, maybe to keep her close, maybe to pretend she was still there." Her throat tightened. "He watched me, he drew me," he whispered her name at night. Roe nodded slowly. "Obsession, he saw something in you that reminded him of her. It's not your fault." Emma stared out the window, the gray clouds reflecting in her eyes. "He said she never left, maybe in his head she didn't." That night she dreamed of footsteps, slow, dragging right above her head. She woke up gasping, tangled in sheets, the faint echo of the sound still pulsing in her memory. She told herself it was trauma, nothing more. But 2 weeks later, when the police released the property back to her, she returned one last time to collect the rest of her belongings. The front door hung crooked, patched temporarily with a strip of police tape. The air inside was stale and quiet. She moved through the rooms mechanically, packing her things. The kitchen table where she used to draw, the chair she'd stood on to touch the hatch, the bed that sat directly beneath where the body had been, every corner felt haunted. She almost left without looking up, almost. But curiosity or something darker made her glance at the ceiling one last time. The attic hatch had been resealed, the edges covered with a thin layer of fresh paint. She exhaled slowly. "Good," she whispered, "stay closed." When she turned to leave, the floor creaked behind her. Her heart stopped. It was probably the wood, she told herself, just the house settling again. But then, from the ceiling there came another sound, faint, almost like a whisper. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed her keys, bolted for the door, and didn't stop running until she reached her car. That night back at her temporary apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She checked every lock twice, pulled every curtain shut. Still, sleep wouldn't come. Around 3 a.m. her phone buzzed, unknown number again. She hesitated, her stomach tightening, before answering. At first nothing, then a faint static, and beneath it a soft, distorted voice. "She's still here." The phone slipped from her hand. She tried calling back, but the line was dead. The next morning she went to the police, trembling. They traced the call again, same result. Unregistered burner, no location. Roe looked troubled. "It could be a prank," he said. "The story been all over the news, people do cruel things." But Emma wasn't convinced. The voice hadn't sounded like Harlan's this time. It was quieter, softer, almost feminine. That night she replayed the voicemail over and over. The static grew louder each time until, if she listened closely enough, she could almost hear something beneath it, faint crying. She stopped listening after that. Days passed. Harlan remained in custody, awaiting psychiatric evaluation. The police said he was mostly unresponsive, sometimes screaming, sometimes whispering to someone who wasn't there. When asked who he was talking to, he would just say, "Laura, she forgives me." But the strange calls didn't stop. Each night a new number, each time the same phrase whispered through the static, "She's still here." Emma stopped answering, she changed phones, she moved again to a small apartment 2 towns over, but one night as she unpacked boxes she found something that made her blood turn to ice. Inside one of her sketchbooks, one she hadn't opened since before everything happened, was a page she didn't remember drawing. A charcoal outline of a woman's face, pale eyes, hollow smile. And beneath it, written in faint pencil, "I'm home." Emma dropped the book, shaking. The room felt colder suddenly, the air thickened, the sound of soft footsteps echoed faintly above her, but she lived on the top floor. She backed away, staring up at the ceiling. There was no hatch, no attic, just plaster. Still the sound continued, slow, deliberate. She turned on every light in the apartment and sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, whispering to herself that it wasn't real. That trauma can make the mind play tricks. But deep down she knew. Harlan had kept his wife's body hidden for 30 years, and somehow, even after his arrest, the house still whispered, still breathed, still remembered. And maybe, just maybe, Laura wasn't ready to leave it. The next morning, Emma called Detective Rowe again. Her voice was hoarse, exhausted. "Can you check something for me?" she asked. "The calls, could they be coming from the prison?" He paused. "That's impossible. Harlan doesn't have access to a phone, he's under suicide watch." Her heart sank. "Then who's calling me?" Rowe hesitated. "Maybe someone inside, another inmate, but how would they even know your number?" She didn't answer, she just hung up and sat in silence for a long time. That night she opened her sketchbook again. The page was blank, the drawing was gone. For a brief, fragile moment she almost felt relief, until she turned the page. On the next sheet a new drawing, this time it was her sleeping. Emma didn't sleep that night. The drawing on the page stared back at her like a warning, her own face beneath an open attic that didn't exist. By dawn she packed her things again, determined to leave. But as she reached for the door her phone buzzed one last time, unknown number. She froze, then slowly she answered. A whisper, gentle, almost kind, drifted through the static. "Thank you for finding me." Her throat tightened. "Laura." Silence, then a faint sigh. "Now he can't hurt anyone else." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "You can rest now." The line went dead. The room suddenly felt warm, lighter somehow. She turned back to the sketchbook. The drawing was gone again. Outside, the sunrise bled gold across the horizon. Emma stepped out of the apartment, breathing deeply for the first time in months. Far away in the abandoned house on Hollow Creek Road, a single sound echoed from the attic, a long, slow exhale. Then nothing. Just stillness. The house had finally gone quiet. And so had the dead. And above her bed in the sketch, a faint outline of an open attic hatch.